My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 31 years old and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence. I thought family meant sacrifice. I was wrong, and it took one look at my face for everything to finally collapse. What if the people you worked the hardest for were the same ones quietly draining you? What if your own family treated your effort like it was their entitlement? Would you keep serving them, smiling, sacrificing, staying quiet, just to keep the peace? And what happens when the exhaustion finally shows on your face, and they realize you're no longer the same person they could control? See, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I just stopped hiding how broken I was, and that single moment did more damage than any argument ever could. Stay till the end, because this wasn't accidental. It was inevitable. For years, I did things that were never written down, never officially assigned, and never properly acknowledged. It started small, the kind of favors families don't even think twice about. Can you help with the paperwork? Can you handle this client call? You're better with numbers, just take care of it. And because it was family, I said yes, every single time. At first, it felt good to be needed. I told myself this was how loyalty worked, that serving your family meant stepping up when others didn't. I was proud of being reliable, proud of being the one they trusted. What I didn't realize back then was how quickly trust can turn into entitlement when boundaries don't exist. The work kept growing, quietly. I wasn't just helping anymore, I was carrying. I handled back-end operations, smoothed over client conflicts, stayed late to fix mistakes that weren't mine. In meetings, I sat quietly while others took credit for results I had stayed up nights to deliver. And every time someone thanked me in private, it somehow justified them ignoring me in public. What hurt wasn't the workload, it was the invisibility. My effort became so consistent that it stopped being impressive. It became expected. If something went right, it was because we're a strong family. If something went wrong, it somehow traced back to me, and I noticed something chilling. No one ever asked if I was tired. Whenever I tried to slow down, the guilt came fast. After all we've done for you, you know how much this family depends on you. Don't be selfish. Those words don't sound cruel on the surface, but over time, they sink in deep. They make you question your right to rest, your right to say no, your right to be human. I watched as boundaries existed for everyone except me. Others took vacations. Others had weekends. Others could decline without consequences. But when I hesitated, the room shifted. The silence felt heavier. The disappointment was unspoken, but loud. So I learned to push past exhaustion because disappointing them felt worse than burning myself out. The strangest part. I defended them, I told friends, they don't mean it. I told myself, this is temporary. I convinced myself that one day they'd notice. That one day all this silent service would be recognized. That one day someone would say, we couldn't have done this without you. But days turned into years, and that day never came. Slowly, my identity became tied to usefulness, not love, not respect. Usefulness, if I was producing, I belonged. If I wasn't, I felt like a burden. And that realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in during late nights, missed meals, and moments when I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the person staring back. I was always on, always fixing, always available, and because I never complained, they assumed I never struggled. That's the danger of being strong for too long. People forget you're carrying weight at all. They stop seeing the cost. By the time I realized what was happening, the pattern was locked in. They didn't see my service as generosity anymore. They saw it as my role. And roles, once assigned, are hard to escape, especially when the system benefits everyone else. What hurt the most was knowing that if I stopped, everything would wobble. The business, the family dynamic, the illusion that everything was fine. And for a long time, that responsibility kept me trapped. Because when you're the glue, you're also the one expected to hold even when you're cracking. I didn't collapse loudly. I didn't break down in front of them. I just started fading, emotionally, physically, mentally. And still, no one asked why. Because when people are used to you carrying the weight, they don't look down until something finally drops. And when it did, It wasn't a mistake. It was me. At first, it didn't feel like manipulation. That's the trick. Real manipulation never announces itself. It disguises itself as love, concern, and family values. The words were always soft, always reasonable. We just trust you more. You're the strongest one. You handle pressure better than the rest of us. And when someone praises your strength long enough, you stop realizing it's being used against you. They learned my weak spots early. They knew I hated conflict. They knew I feared disappointing people. They knew I wanted approval more than credit, and instead of abusing that openly, they wrapped it in affection. Compliments came right before requests. Guilt followed right after hesitation. It became a rhythm so smooth, I didn't even notice I was dancing to their tune. Whenever I looked overwhelmed, they didn't tell me to rest. They reminded me why stopping would hurt them. If you don't do this, everything falls apart. We're counting on you. You wouldn't abandon family, would you? It wasn't shouted. It was whispered. And somehow, whispers cut deeper than yelling ever could. They reframed sacrifice as proof of love. The more I gave, the more loyal I was considered. The more exhausted I became, the more committed they said I looked. And any time I expressed discomfort, even carefully, it was flipped back on me. You're being sensitive. You're overthinking. Why are you making this negative? Suddenly, my feelings were the problem, not the pressure they were applying. What made it darker was how they kept me isolated without ever saying stay. They didn't forbid me from building a life outside them. They just made sure it felt inconvenient. Important conversations happened last minute. Emergencies always required me. Plans conflicted with my personal time. And when I chose myself once in a while, the punishment wasn't anger, it was cold distance. Silence, withdrawal, the kind that makes you rush back just to restore peace. They also mastered comparison. Your cousin never complains. Your sibling manages just fine. But what they never mentioned was that those people weren't carrying the same weight. Comparison wasn't about fairness. It was about keeping me in line, making me feel inadequate for struggling under a load designed to crush me. The scariest manipulation came disguised as concern. You've changed. You don't smile like you used to. Are you okay? But those questions never came with solutions, only expectations that I'd fix myself so I could keep performing. They didn't want me healed. They wanted me functional. Every time I tried to draw a boundary, it was treated like betrayal. A simple "I can't right now" was met with disappointment so heavy it felt like a punishment. And eventually, I learned that compliance was easier than resistance. That was the goal all along. I noticed how they remembered my mistakes vividly, but forgot my sacrifices instantly. One missed detail erased months of effort. One tired response outweighed years of loyalty. The scale was always tipped, but only against me. And still, I kept showing up, hoping consistency would earn respect. It never did, because exploitation doesn't end when you give enough. It ends when you stop giving, or when the exploiter loses control. And control was everything to them. They needed me dependable, predictable, and emotionally invested. Not empowered, not independent. Certainly not aware. By the time I realized love had become leverage, I was already deep inside the system they built around me. A system where my value depended on output, where rest was selfish. Where saying no required justification, and where my exhaustion was convenient as long as it stayed quiet. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as infrastructure. Something that just worked. Something that didn't need thanks, only maintenance. And like any system taken for granted, they only noticed its importance when cracks began to show. And those cracks. They started showing long before I spoke a single word. That morning, I didn't plan to reveal anything. There was no speech rehearsed in my head, no decision to confront anyone. In fact, I told myself it was just another day, another meeting, another set of expectations I'd quietly carry. The only difference was that I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. I skipped the makeup, not out of rebellion, out of exhaustion. My face felt heavy, like it had finally decided to stop lying for me. Dark circles framed my eyes. My jaw ached from clenching it in my sleep. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see weakness. I saw truth, and for the first time in years, I didn't try to correct it. When I walked into the office, conversations slowed. Not stopped, slowed. Like the room had sensed something was off but didn't yet understand what it was seeing. I took my seat without greeting anyone. No forced smile, no upbeat tone, just silence. And somehow that silence was louder than anything I could have said. Someone asked if I was sick. I shook my head. Another joked that I looked rough. I didn't laugh. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at them. And that's when it happened, the shift. People are comfortable when you play your role. But when you stop performing, they don't know where to stand. As the meeting started, I listened the way I always did, attentive, precise, ready to fix whatever needed fixing. But this time I didn't jump in. I let the gaps stretch. I let mistakes hang in the air. And one by one, eyes turned toward me, waiting, expecting, depending, the same way they always had. Except this time, I didn't rush to save them. I felt it then, the discomfort, not mine, theirs. They weren't used to seeing me tired. They weren't used to seeing me quiet. And they definitely weren't used to seeing me look at them without asking for approval. My face wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was empty. And that scared them more than tears ever could. Someone finally asked, "Are you okay?" I paused, long enough for the room to go still. Then I said, "I'm fine." And for the first time, they didn't believe me. Because my face told the story I never dared to voice. It showed years of overwork, of swallowed resentment, of nights spent fixing problems no one remembered creating. It showed the cost. And once people see the cost, they can't unsee it. The meeting ended awkwardly. People avoided eye contact. Conversations felt forced. I noticed how no one asked me for anything afterward. Not immediately, like they were recalculating, testing what this new version of me meant for them. In the hallway, one of them stopped me, said my name softly, asked if something was wrong. I met their eyes and didn't soften, didn't reassure, didn't make it easier for them, and in that moment I saw fear flicker, not concern, fear. Because they realized something important before I ever did. I wasn't breaking. I was detaching. And detachment is dangerous to people who benefit from your emotional investment. They rely on your guilt, your empathy, your need to be needed. The moment your face stops reflecting that, control starts slipping. I went home that day knowing something irreversible had happened. Not because I spoke up, but because I didn't cover it up anymore. I let my exhaustion exist in the open, and that quiet honesty disrupted everything. They thought my silence meant compliance. That day, they learned silence can also mean the end. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no announcement, no dramatic confrontation, no slammed doors. That's why it caught them off guard. They were watching for an explosion and missed the quiet earthquake happening beneath their feet. The first thing that changed was my availability. Not in a way anyone could accuse me of, but in a way they felt. I stopped answering immediately, not ignored, just delayed. Minutes turned into hours. Hours into, "I'll get back to you." And every delay forced them to sit with a discomfort they'd never experienced before, uncertainty. Then came the subtle language change. I stopped saying, "I'll handle it," and started saying, "That's not my responsibility." Calmly, without explanation, without apology, and each time I said it, I watched faces tighten. Because they weren't used to hearing those words from me, they were used to compliance dressed up as kindness. Requests turned into negotiations. Instructions softened into questions. "Can you? Would you mind? If you have time." They didn't realize it yet, but they were already adjusting to a new power structure, one where my consent was no longer guaranteed. What really unsettled them was how little emotion I showed. No frustration, no guilt, no defensiveness. I wasn't angry, I was distant. And distance is terrifying to people who rely on emotional leverage. They tried to pull me back in the only ways they knew how: small compliments, sudden concern, nostalgic reminders of how close we used to be. I saw it clearly now. The kindness wasn't about me. It was about restoring access. They tested boundaries carefully at first. Small asks, low stakes, just enough to see if the old version of me would resurface. I declined without drama. And every refusal landed heavier than a confrontation ever could because it was undeniable. Calm, final. Behind closed doors, things started wobbling. Tasks fell through. Deadlines slipped. People were forced to confront how much I had been holding together without acknowledgement. And instead of admitting dependence, they grew uneasy. Because recognizing my value meant recognizing how poorly they'd treated me. The tone in meetings shifted. I noticed how my words were suddenly documented. How decisions waited for my input instead of assuming my follow-through. It wasn't respect yet, but it was caution. And caution is the first sign that power is moving. They tried one last tactic, urgency, manufactured emergencies. We really need you on this. I looked at the request, assessed it, and said no, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. And in that moment, something broke. They realized they were unprepared for a version of me who didn't need their approval, who didn't fear their disappointment, who didn't rush to fix the mess. They had built a system that only worked as long as I stayed in my place. The moment I stepped out of it, even quietly, the cracks became impossible to hide. The shift wasn't loud, but it was permanent. They could feel it in the pauses, in the hesitations, in the way conversations stopped when I entered the room, not out of dominance but uncertainty. They no longer knew what I'd tolerate. And that made them careful. Control thrives on predictability. I had become unpredictable. And that was the shift they never prepared for. I used to believe revenge had to be loud. That it needed confrontation, exposure, maybe even humiliation. I thought justice looked like finally saying everything I'd swallowed for years. But when the moment came, when I actually had the power to burn bridges, I realized something that surprised even me. Walking away would hurt them more, because they were prepared for anger. They were ready to defend themselves, argue, justify, twist the story. What they weren't ready for was indifference, the absence of reaction. The quiet certainty that I no longer needed anything from them. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't give speeches. I didn't explain my reasons in long emotional messages. I just stopped being present in the ways they depended on. I fulfilled only what was formally required and nothing more. No favors, no late nights, no emotional labor disguised as loyalty. At first, they didn't notice. They assumed it was temporary. Burnout, maybe. A phase. They waited for me to bounce back into my old role the way I always had. But days passed, then weeks. And slowly, reality set in. Things started falling apart, not dramatically, but inconveniently. The kind of inconvenience that exposes weak foundations. Decisions stalled. Small errors multiplied. Tasks I used to handle instinctively now required meetings, approvals, delays. And with every delay, they felt the cost of my absence. They tried to re-engage me indirectly. Casual check-ins. Friendly messages. Invitations that felt more strategic than sincere. I responded politely, briefly, professionally, no emotion, no warmth. And nothing unsettles people more than realizing they've lost emotional access to someone they once controlled. What hurt them wasn't that I left, it was that I left cleanly. No drama meant no closure for them. No confrontation meant no redemption arc. They couldn't label me ungrateful or unstable because I gave them nothing to point at. I followed the rules they'd set, just without the extra pieces that made their system work. At some point, someone asked if we could talk things through. I agreed, sat across from them, listened. And when they finished, I said, "I'm comfortable with my decision." That was it. No accusations, no list of grievances, just certainty. Their faces told me everything. They wanted guilt. They wanted negotiation. They wanted me to explain myself into a corner they could climb out of. But I didn't offer them that gift, because clarity doesn't argue, it stands. Walking away forced them to face something they'd avoided for years, that my presence had been a privilege, not a guarantee. And once that privilege was gone, there was no way to recreate it without acknowledging the damage they'd caused. I built a life where my effort was visible, where my limits were respected, where my value wasn't measured by how much I could carry for others. And the peace that came with that decision was louder than any revenge fantasy I'd ever imagined. The real revenge wasn't success. It wasn't watching them struggle. It was knowing they could no longer reach me. Because when you walk away without bitterness, without chaos, without looking back, you don't just end a chapter. You end their control. If you've ever felt invisible, used, or taken for granted, I want you to pause and think, are you still giving too much to people who don't value you? Hit that like button if you've ever been in my shoes, and comment below with your story. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the truth, the stories nobody tells out loud, are exactly what we explore here next. You don't want to miss what happens when the tables turn.